Welcome back. Today we're going to be going over the next lesson in this course, which is 2.2, right? Complementary and supplementary angles, which will be the start of the second unit. If you haven't watched 1.9 already, I recommend you do so, but I don't want to waste any more of your time, so let's get right into it. So our main focus will be on, complements and supplements, which we kind of covered in one of the first lessons, but this will be more specific into that. So complementary angles, right? Pretty simple, right? It's just two angles that add up to 90 degrees, right? And essentially, you can also think of it as two angles that add up to a right angle, right? So each of the two angles, themselves, are called complements, right? So, for example, in this diagram, right, you have a 9-degree angle there, and remember how the angles in a triangle add up to 180, right? So that means these two add up to 90, and these two um, groups together add up to 180, right? So the sum of these two angles has to be 90 degrees. So because these two had to add up to 90, they're complementary angles, and therefore, angle C and angle E are complements. And you also know that they're complements because they add up to 90 degrees, right? 60 plus 30 is 90. Similar logic, right? Here you have this entire angle, which is a right angle, and then you have FGJ, right? And then you have angle G, or you have angle JGH, right? So because both of them form that entire right angle, they are complements, right? And again, right, FGJ is the complement of JGH. They both add up to that right angle. So moving on from that, really similar, right, in logic, it's supplementary angles, which are kind of the same thing, but instead of adding to 90 degrees, they add up to 180. So here you have two angles that add up to 180 degrees, and each of those are going to be called supplements. So again, same logic, it's just instead of adding to 90, you add up to 180, or you add up to a straight angle. So again, right, we have straight angle right here, STV, and these two smaller angles, right, they both add up to make the entire straight angle. So as a result, you would say that they're supplements, right? Or they're supplementary angles, and that one of them is a supplement to the other. And I mentioned how there's going to be some theorems that you guys have to memorize, right? The ones you have to know here, right, I've highlighted in red, right? If two angles are complementary, then the sum of the two angles is a right angle. And of course, the same logic for supplementary, right? And this is one of the few theorems, or one of the theorems where the converse is true, right? Remember, converse covered in 1.8 is just the opposite, right? So here, right, if the sum of two angles is a right angle, the two angles are complementary, right? And likewise, the converse is also true for this supplementary angle theorem. General rule of thumb, right? If you have an angle x, the complementary angle is 90 minus x, right? Because if you do x plus 90 minus x, you get 90, right? And similar logic, right? If you have an angle x, the supplementary angle is 180 minus x, because if you add those two, you get 180 degrees, right? Now, most of the time, when you're dealing with supplements and complements, there are going to be proofs, right? Which is why I went over those theorems, but there's also going to be a lot of algebra questions. I've highlighted or mentioned one of them here, right? So the key for any of these supplement and complement questions is that you have to just read the problem and uh, translate each phrase into a mathematical expression, right? So, for example, here you have the measure of the supplement of an angle, right? So how do we write supplement of an angle in a mathematical way? Well, that's just 180 minus x, right? Because remember, that's what I talked about. 180 minus x is going to be the supplement. Is, right, is always just equals. And then it says that is 60 less than 3 times the measure of the complement. Once again, the complement is 90 minus x, right? As I mentioned before, 90 minus x. And because it's 3 times the measure, right, you do 3 times the complement, and you subtract 60 because it says 60 less than. So that essentially, we already have our equation, right? We have the supplement here, 180 minus x is is equal to 60 less than 3 times the complement, right? So now what that allows us to do is find the value of x, and using some algebra, you can get that x is equal to 15. And that's essentially what we're trying to find in the first place, right? Because the question asks you now to find the measure of the complement of the angle, right? So we know that the x value is 15, and we also talked about earlier how a complement is 90 minus x, right? So 90 minus what we got for x, 15, that's going to be the complement, which will give us 75. So that's how you do this problem. Once again, just translate each specific phrase into a mathematical expression, and usually after you're done with that, you can easily just solve for x and find the value of whatever the question you're trying to ask. So yeah, this was a really short lesson, but again, right? If I had to sum this up, complementary angles add up to 9 degrees, supplementary angles add up to 180. If you have any questions, leave it down in the comments, and I'll see you next time.